So Oregon goes undefeated. They win the Big Ten. Everything's great, and yet they kind of got screwed.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can get a big return. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Lots to get to. My individual standouts. Men's basketball loses for the first time. I'm not that worried about it. Heartbreaking, though. It was the Big Ten, had a couple of, I got thoughts on all that coming up on today's show. But let's start with the obvious one. Oregon's the number one seed, and yet they've got the hardest path to win the national championship. And Dan Lanning gave the sort of quote that you'd want a head coach to give after something like this happens, but let's call a spade a spade. He's not supposed to do that, right? He's the head coach, but me, definitely not the head coach. And no, despite the kicking video some of you saw, I'm not going to be the head special teams coach either. But when I look at what Oregon was given in this 12-team playoff, it is just one example of why I've been against it for so long. You are giving more power to people who have proven they don't know how to run the sport very well. And here you've got a format in which Oregon is legitimately punished for winning the Big Ten. Penn State has got an easier path as the 6. Oregon would have been the 5 had they lost that football game, and it would have been an easier path to get to the semifinals. At the end of the day, Oregon has to win one less game. That's the upside. They get extra time to prepare. That's the upside. I'm still glad about all of that. I think the confidence in this team and this coaching staff when they have been rested this year has showcased that it should be pretty high for Oregon fans. But make no mistake about it, playing the winner of Tennessee and Ohio State is probably tough. Now, college football hasn't always made sense this year. You don't know what sort of chaos is going to ensue. But if what you'd call chalk holds in the 12-team bracket, Oregon would play Ohio State, Tennessee winner. I suspect that'll be Ohio State. That'll be their first playoff game. We already know how tough the Buckeyes can be. I get they lost to Michigan. That just means their floor is lower than we thought. I still know what their ceiling is. Tennessee also has a very high ceiling. They can win a national championship too. Then in the next round, if they were to win that game, they'd get the winner of probably Texas and Arizona State. Now that could be a doable matchup. Heck, if Clemson upsets Texas in the first round, suddenly it doesn't look quite as tough. But the way things look on paper in college football this year is not how everything has played out all the time. I cannot remember a season in which more double-digit point spread underdogs have won outright of a sizable margin. Northern Illinois, 28.5 points. Vanderbilt over Bama. Northern Illinois beat Notre Dame, by the way. Vanderbilt over Bama, 22.5. Kentucky over Ole Miss, 17.5 on the road. Just because a matchup looks a certain way on paper doesn't mean that's how it plays out on the field. And yes, Oregon is in a less than advantageous position for having the best season of anybody in all of college football. And that is not right. They should be reseeding this stuff. Oregon should get to play the lowest remaining seed in the second round. That's not going to happen. That's what should happen. But it's not going to happen this year because the rules are the rules. I don't anticipate it happening next year either because the playoff contract is locked in for 2 years. It could change starting in 2026. But reseeding in the second round, yes, it should absolutely happen. Will it? Nope. Does not appear incredibly likely. So them's the breaks. Them's the breaks. And Oregon gets a bad luck of the draw. And if you want to be annoyed at that, you absolutely can. Here's the flip side of that coin. Do you think that Dan Lanning cares? Do you think those guys care? No, you care because you're a fan. Because you think about the practical nature of, I'd rather play a team who I don't think is as good. But think about this from the other side of the coin. You shouldn't look at it as Oregon has to play Team X, Team Y, and then Team Z to win the national championship. They're 3 wins away from doing that. Team X, Team Y, and Team Z, they've got to play Oregon. They are the ones that have to find a way to do what 13 teams have tried and failed to do so far. That doesn't mean that somebody can't. We've seen the Ducks look vulnerable in 2 of their last 3 games. They easily could have lost the Ohio State game. They easily could have lost the Boise State game. They kept finding ways to win. It's one of the reasons I have confidence in this team. So they can win in a lot of different ways. But I do not worry about whether or not Dan Lanning and company are going to be prepared for that. I do not worry about whether this team is going to be mentally locked in. I don't worry about any team out there. Yes, some matchups on paper look tougher than others. But I think as we've seen throughout the year, boy, it depends on the day. It depends on, hey, here's a game plan that this coaching staff comes in with, and this might work, this might not work. The game plan Wisconsin had offensively didn't work. The one that Penn State had did work. Wisconsin and Penn State, by the way, played in Madison this year. It was a competitive football game for 3.5 quarters. So Wisconsin can play at that sort of level where Penn State was. I think that was more Oregon playing down to that particular level. But those are, you look at a team, and when you say, oh man, Oregon could play Ohio State or they could play Tennessee, I think fans automatically think about what that team is on their best day. Who on their best day against Oregon's best day is just better outright? I haven't seen anybody this year. Now, if Oregon plays a B- game and Ohio State wins the first round and they play an A- game, yeah, Ohio State's probably going to win. But it's Ohio State that has to play an extra game. It's Ohio State that's going to have to go all the way across the country on a much longer trip, and teams that have gone 2 time zones haven't had the utmost success this year in college football. It's probably different because there's an extended layoff. Those first round games will be the 20th and the 21st, and then the New Year's Day game will be on a Wednesday, but obviously it'll be 10 or 11 days, or 11 or 12 days later. Calendar math is even worse than regular math. Let's just call a spade a spade. But I think that Oregon is either capable of winning a national championship or they're not. They're either going to put it together or they're not. And yes, it looks tougher on paper. But like I said earlier, the paper and the reality, not always the same. What if Texas gets upset by Clemson? Well, if you were worried about Texas before and the idea of playing them in the semifinal, if Oregon wins the first round game, shouldn't you be worried about a team that is capable of beating Texas in that particular environment? Kind of seems like you should. So this Oregon team, if they go out and play the way that they are capable, there's nobody who's going to just straight outplay them. Now, if Oregon is sloppy, if Oregon has mistakes, they kept the penalties to a minimum. I know James Franklin didn't like that very much and thought there should have been more. I haven't done a rewatch of the entire game yet. I'll probably do that ahead of tomorrow's show and whatnot. But Oregon played a pretty clean game. Oregon offensively was rolling up and down the field. That Penn State defense is not a joke. Go look at how they played against Ohio State early in the season. They were really good. That's the most yards that Penn State defense has allowed all year. So any team that scares you on paper, this Oregon team has got the potential to play with them. They've got the potential to outplay them on any given day. It's just going to come down to those select individual games. That's it. Yeah, on paper, it's a tougher path. But guess what? On paper, Arizona State was finishing close to last in the Big 12. So was Indiana, and they're both in the college football playoff, and ASU's got a bye. Paper, reality, not always one and the same. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter at @McLaughlinCFB or at LockedOnDucks. So I love doing individual standouts. Won't be able to do this again for a while. Hopefully next time I do, it'll be after a win and Oregon will be going to the semifinals. Hopefully, that's the game plan. But there is one guy that has to stand out above everybody else. It's clear and obvious, isn't it? About as obvious as the fact that you need to go to Omaha Steaks. Nothing delivers comfort and joy quite like the unrivaled quality and taste of Omaha Steaks. It's guaranteed perfection in every single bite, and right now you can save on unforgettable gifts with 50% off site-wide at omahasteaks.com, plus score an extra $30 off with the promo code College. With 5 generations of experience, they consistently deliver the world's best steak experience, and the gifting experts at Omaha Steaks have made it easy to deliver the perfect gift with thoughtfully curated packages featuring gourmet favorites. From legendary steaks to mouth-watering desserts and more, save 50% off site-wide for a limited time at omahasteaks.com. Plus, our listeners get an extra $30 off with the promo code COLLEGE. That's 50% off at omahasteaks.com and an extra $30 off with promo code COLLEGE. Minimum purchase may apply. omahasteaks.com. Had someone comment on a recent show on YouTube. Where is the second segment sip? Like 12 people like to comment or something. It always happens, whether you see it or not. It's a matter of whether I execute it and it flows in the show. Not throwing it in just to put it in. It's got to have rhythm and flow like a river, or Oregon's offense on Saturday, whichever one you prefer. So when I think about the individual standouts from Saturday's game, guys whose performance requires a by name shout out on the show, there are a lot of guys, and shockingly, or not a lot of them are on the defensive side of the ball, except for the first guy, and that's Nico Reed. So I was texting my brother and a buddy during the game, as I often do, and my friend asks, who's going to make a play? Because Oregon's defense is in a spot up by 8, 2 minutes to go, trying to hold. There was the whole debacle with the fair catch and whatnot. And oh my gosh, he clearly waved his hand. That's why Taishim let up. And then they got the call right and such. And then it was who's going to make a play. And my first response was not the safeties. They did not have a great day in coverage. Did some good things at times, made adjustments in the second half. There are not going to be shout-outs from the safeties here. It was not a pretty day for the back end of Oregon's defense. But Nico Reed, Oregon legend. Oregon legend with that play. That is the textbook dictionary definition of perfect coverage. You cannot do it any better than that. He turns and runs. He turns his head. He locates the ball. He catches it. He's not making contact whatsoever with the wide receiver. He's just blanket him. He's got him pinned to the sideline, but he's not pushing him there, so there's no flag. Catches the ball, keeps it off the ground, turns his body, stays in. Like you could not draw that up any better. And I coming into the season did not think we'd be as high on Nico Reed as we are, and he wasn't perfect in this game either. Got beat for a long touchdown in the first half when Penn State went on a 14-3 run to pull within 7 at the break. But when his best was needed, he came through. Number one shot. Yes, I shouted him out before I shouted out Dillon Gabriel and Tez Johnson. Those guys are kind of obvious. They had a phenomenal game. But who made the play of the game? There were a lot of individual moments and sequences in which the offense was able to execute. But that play, that was all Nico Reed. Drew Aller had time. He took a shot. Nico Reed said, no, we're going to end the game right here, right now. So Nico Reed is individual shout out numero uno. Number 2, one of the matchups I highlighted coming into this game, one of the reasons I was confident Oregon would win, is Penn State's defense, which has been great this year, and against the Oregon offense, allowed more yards than they had against anybody all season. The reason I was confident is the strength for Penn State is the edge of the defensive line. Abdul Carter, I forgot the other guy's name, admittedly. He had a half a sack. Another guy had half a sack. They got to Dillon Gabriel once. Abdul Carter did not have a sack or a tackle for loss in this game. That is, number 1, great game planning by Will Stein and Alik Terry. But number 2, a Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly. Chef's kiss. That was exquisitely good. Exquisitely good. You cannot ask for anything more than the way those guys play. Also, shout out Kenyon Sadiq for a pancake block on Abdul Carter on Oregon's last touchdown to Jordan James when he ran up the middle. Carter kind of jumps inside of Cornelius, and Sadiq just boom, wham, blocks him and pancakes him to the turf. Awesome moment. But play in and play out. They wanted to get after Dillon Gabriel. 284, 4 touchdowns, sacked 1 time, no interceptions, no fumbles. Guys were balling at the tackles. They're playing on Sundays after this year. We just got to accept that. I mean, Johnny's done. Connerly could technically come back, but I mean, performances like that against a top 10 NFL draft pick, your draft stock, dude, shooting up. Absolutely shooting up. Next, I would like to shout out the specialists in this game. Ross James, Atticus Sappington, Andrew Boyle as well, who kicked an extra point, and Gary Bryant Jr. What was your assessment of the Oregon special teams in this game? My assessment is they were perfect. Sappington, no kicks out of bounds. I believe all touchbacks on the kickoffs. With the number of points that were scored in this game, that was pretty impressive. He was kicking really well, made his only field goal to give Oregon a 7-point lead. Boyle made his only extra point. I have thoughts on that in a moment. Ross James had 2 incredible punts, and the defense was only able to back it up one time. Led to the interception, by the way, of Dante Manning and 7 points. Those sorts of things, you don't think about them a lot, but that first great punt from Ross James was huge, and then the second one, the defense blew it. The face masking against Harmon, the chunk plays, and Penn State went right down the field for a scoring drive going 89 yards or so. So that was disappointing to be sure, but I thought the special teams, Gary Bryant caught every punt. There were no miscues, nothing. In a game like that that's going back and forth, you can't allow a momentum swing on special teams. And those guys were absolute nails across the board. They were all really good. I have a theory on Andrew Boyle. So we have seen him come in throughout the course of games, even though Sappington's kind of the short range guy and Boyle's the long range kicker, we've seen Boyle come in and kick an extra point sometime. He hasn't missed one this season, at least not that I can remember. But my theory is that is Lanning and special teams coach Joe Lorig preparing for the possibility of Boyle kicking a 45-plus yard field goal or a 50-yard field goal. My theory is they don't want that kick. If a 50-yard field goal comes along, they don't want that kick to be his first kick. So they give him an extra point, a confidence boost, like putting a guy in off the bench and trying to get him a play to go to the free throw line. Get him an easy one, get him in rhythm, and then say, okay, here's what you're in to do. That's just my theory. I don't know that that's the answer, but I had that thought during the game. Like maybe they're trying to just get him loose. Maybe they want him to just be in a rhythm at least a little bit. If it just at least one kick, it's better than no kicks. And coming out cold trying to kick 50-yarder, see it go through the uprights and such. So that was my thought there. Talked about Kenyon Sadiq. Wrapping this up for my shout-outs today. Noah Whittington ran phenomenally well. And I actually thought at times they were going to Whittington too often. You know, the hot hand is a difficult thing to manage when you have 2 running backs as capable as James and Whittington, but it's hard to argue with the results because I'm a huge Jordan James fan and he's dominating in the red zone, and that's where, you know, he's always been at his best because that's where he started out as a true freshman back in 2022. But Oregon averaged 4.5 yards a carry. That includes Gabriel, just 6 carries for 17 yards. But James, 4.4 yards a carry. Noah Whittington, 15 for 82 yards. There were times where he looked even better. There were times where he looked like the best version of himself in this game when Oregon really needed it, because you saw the value of having 2 quality running backs on the other side. Why are Nick Singleton and Katron Allen hard to tackle? Number 1, they are thick and powerful guys. And number 2, they're rotating so often, they're always fresh. So when they're on the field, you're never getting them worn down. And that's why they ran through all of Oregon's arm tackles. And the number 2 running back spot, let's be honest here, Whittington hasn't always been great. But second half of the season, he's really come on. I thought that was the best game he has played. I thought it was better than Purdue. I thought it was better than Illinois. The way that he was moving side to side, the way that he was getting through tackles and reading the holes, mostly correct. There was one in particular he missed late in the game when Oregon was trying to run out the clock the first time and then they had to punt. Eventually, he missed a cutback lane. That was the only time I felt like he made the wrong read. Held on to the football, ran really well, awesome day, and I'm stoked for Whittington for having that game in that spot. And that's the guy who I thought coming into this year, you might have a 1A, 1B situation. This is what I thought the backfield would look like. And I'm not lobbying against Jordan James being the clear-cut number 1, but I am not opposed to having this option available to say, hey, Noah Whittington's running well, and he brings something that Jordan James doesn't. James is a one-cut guy. Noah Whittington, boy, he was slicing and dicing, just knifing through the secondary and making those jump cuts that he is so well known for. And he looked really healthy. He looked explosive. He was decisive with his cuts, but he let his blocks get set up. He read it well on the outside when his receivers got out there. Thought the receivers did a great job blocking. I really liked what I saw from Noah Whittington in this game. Usually, there are more defensive standouts to talk about. But when you give up over 500 yards of offense and 37 points, well, not so many this week. But that can change once January 1st rolls around. Let me know your thoughts in the YouTube comments or hit me up on Twitter as well. So, Oregon basketball lost for the first time on the men's side. Look, it was bound to happen. It was bound to happen. It was kind of a bummer. Oregon, I won't say should have won. They could have won. There was a questionable call. I have thoughts on that. And the Big Ten had some major stumbles, and they need to be called out for it. That's coming up next. After we talk about FanDuel, of course. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. If you had Oregon minus 3.5, you did very well. If you had the over, it hit in the first half, just the way we all drew it up. I had 27-17, final score 45-37. Whoopsie daisies. College football's unpredictable. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game in the NFL, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. FanDuel.com, that's the place to go to get $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. FanDuel.com, never waste a hunch. Don't let them just float away like memories in Dumbledore's Pensieve. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, it was going to show up eventually. I don't even think the slow start doomed Oregon here. UCLA hit a bunch of tough shots. At some level, you got to tip your cap and say, you know what? They hit shots. But Oregon started hitting threes. Jackson Shellstad hit a late three to give Oregon the lead with 10 seconds left. And then UCLA hits a step back, fall away, Nate Biddle, hand in the face, banked in three with 0.4 of a second left. Okay, what are you going to do? Now, there was a goaltend that was overturned that should not have been overturned. Absolutely should not. Was called a goaltend on the floor, took 2 points away from Oregon with 1:17 to go in the ball game. I do not believe that call was correctly adjudicated. But this was not a game that Oregon lost, and I felt, they're going to start to stumble. No, UCLA is a good team, number one. And number two, they hit a bunch of tough shots. They shot the three better than they had all season. Sure, there were some defensive moments that could have been better, but this is college basketball, not college football. You're not going to go undefeated, even if you end up getting a top 3 or 4 seed by the end of the year, which is certainly the goal after the hot start for Oregon at 8-0, 8-0, 9-0, something like that. I think that Oregon is completely fine. They get a much more manageable part of their schedule upcoming, and I expect them to win those games and do so pretty comfortably. They should do it comfortably. They lose to UCLA 73-71. They're 9-1. 9-1. They split with USC and UCLA, win on the road, lose at home. There are some inconsistencies that still could be worked out, but I mean, Nate Biddle is awesome offensively. And Oregon went 9 of 21 from 3. That's all they need. This doesn't have to be an explosive three-point shooting team. You've got a bunch of low-post scoring. KJ Evans did some nice things on offense. Shellstad can score inside out. Nate Biddle is just a force to be reckoned with at both ends of the floor. And he defended the final sequence really well. The guy got lucky. Let's call it how it was. But you can't allow a team to shoot 12 of 23 from beyond the arc. That certainly has to improve. But the upcoming schedule for Oregon goes like this. Stephen F. Austin, that is a week from yesterday when this show is coming out. Then they play Stanford, who's not that good. Then they play Weber State, and then Big Ten play begins. So they should, let's emphasize should, college basketball, crazy things can happen here. They should be 12-1 going into Big Ten play, still ranked inside the top 25. This is not a crushing loss. This was not, oh my gosh, everything came to a head here. UCLA played a good game. Oregon played a good game. It was back and forth. There were big shots here, big shots there. I was as encouraged coming out of a loss here as I possibly could be. But yeah, it felt like Oregon still had a little bit more magic in them. They got a couple stops. Biddle forced a turnover after the goaltend was taken off the board and 2 points were removed, which I don't think is the correct call. Oregon stays focused. They stay in it. UCLA blows an assignment. Shellstad hits a 3. That's the best thing from this game, frankly. Jackson Shellstad hit 3s. That is a major development. He was 3 of 4 from beyond the arc. That's huge. He's not going to go 3 of 4 every game, but that guy needs to see the ball go through the net from distance, and he's hit a couple of big shots from 3 over the last 2 games, one of which, of course, leads to a win, and one should have but did not. So you're going to have these moments throughout the course of the season. The bounce back, I expect to be strong record-wise. I hope the strong play will continue as well. Stephen F. Austin's not to be trifled with, nor is Stanford. But, yeah, Oregon should be able to win those games. But Shellstad and Biddle going combined 5 of 7 from 3. I have said for a while, if those guys start hitting 3s, this offense is going to be completely unleashed. And that's the way it felt. It was a sigh of relief. It was like, finally, those guys are seeing shots go down. And that's what they need, more than anything. Keyshawn Barthelemy still the same guy. Bamba had a terrible game. He missed his only shot. He just couldn't get going. He had 5 turnovers and 1 shot attempt. Wasn't a good game for him. And Brandon Angel wasn't as efficient as normal. Like, not everyone's going to play their best game every single time out. But overall, I am really encouraged. I am encouraged with how this team is playing. It is disappointing to lose that game. It is not crushing for the resume or the at-large or anything like that. They're going to have to do well in conference play, and the Big Ten is looking strong as usual. Wisconsin's really good. Illinois is really good. Purdue is, of course, going to be good again, much better than they are in football. Of course, Purdue's got a new head football coach now, Barry Odom from UNLV, but they're fine. They're completely. Was it annoying to lose this game? Because you lose by 2 on a desperation banked in 3 from an angle. Like it was a 1 in 100 shot and it goes in. Like, okay, whatever. But shout out to the crowd. They showed up, wanted to see that, absolutely did, and very much want to see that continue throughout the course of the season, especially as Big Ten play begins. Speaking of the Big Ten, there were a couple of notable stumbles here. I've gotten questions and comments from people about the broadcast crew. I haven't done a full rewatch yet. When I do, I will have thoughts. I, of course, in the announcer department, very opinionated. People who were talking to me at the alumni tailgate, I'm sure you got that sense very quickly. When it comes to announcing, I have very strong and specific opinions because it is my craft, it is my passion, and it's something I take very seriously. So I'll share thoughts and hear how Nessler and Danielson did, at least in my view. I love those guys, have my whole life, and everybody has an off day. Here's where the Big Ten screwed up. 2 things, and neither one was acceptable. One of them, James Franklin's got a beef. I'll get to that in a sec. The Big Ten, not once, but twice during the conference championship game. I know this is a little thing, but Ty Burrell is a pretty famous Oregon alum. He was twice put up onto the jumbo screens inside Lucas Oil Stadium as a famous alum of Penn State. That is an all-time screw-up. That is an all-time screw. That's like putting up a picture of Tinker Hatfield being like, yeah, notable Wisconsin alum, Tinker Hatfield. Or great Oregon football player, Jake Browning. Like guys, what are we doing? And then to not correct it, again, small thing, but that annoyed me. That annoyed me. I cannot stand when organizations that should have a higher level of attention to detail just don't. And that wasn't the only thing. So James Franklin in his post-game press conference said many things. He said that Dan Lanning's got tremendous resources. Like he's a frustrated coach at the end of the game. He's saying what his fan base wants to hear and what he's legitimately feeling. He's not thinking so much as he's just feeling and talking. I don't begrudge him that much for that. I definitely don't begrudge him for complaining about the band. So somehow the place where the Big Ten media post-game press conferences were set up was so close to where the Oregon band was performing that, like, after the game, when it was all over, Oregon's band starts playing the fight song. And James Franklin says, hey, I don't mind them playing, but this is kind of a JV setup here. And I saw online, he was taking some flack for that. I'm going, why is James Franklin in the wrong? He has to come to this press conference, which he doesn't want to do. Officials would never have to do that, by the way, because, like on that goaltend in the Oregon UCLA basketball game, I'd love to see the officials give us an explanation, but, they're adults, so why would we hold them accountable? That's a completely ridiculous notion. Anyway, so James Franklin, along with 2 kids under the age of 23, are there trying to answer questions, and they can't because the band is playing. How is that? I've never even seen that, where you have a media room that could be that heavily influenced by noise that is taking place over on the football field. So he calls it a JV setup, and then people are saying, oh man, I don't know if he needed to be that harsh. Like, what are you talking about? That's embarrassing. That's completely embarrassing that your conference championship game, post-game presser is able to be interrupted by the band. It didn't occur to anybody that you should have a room that is soundproofed off from the rest of, everything, the celebration that's going on. So I'm with James Franklin on that one. I'm not with him on the penalty discrepancy. Which face mask did you want to take back? Or which personal foul? Like early in the game, they were grabbing Jordan James' face mask and they kept throwing the flags. Which one of those do you want to take back? Like, yeah, Oregon had fewer penalty yards than Penn State. Those early penalties, there were 3 15-yarders against the Nittany Lions in the first quarter that all helped Oregon move the ball down the field. I mean, they were moving it down the field at will anyway, but certainly it doesn't hurt to get a free 15 yards. If they don't grab the face mask, Jordan James converts one of those 4th downs. I don't know about the other plays. I don't know which one you're taking back there exactly. I think he was frustrated at the lack of penalties on Oregon sometimes. They definitely missed an ineligible man down the field on the Tez Johnson touchdown, 100%. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. As I've said about officiating for a very long time, I expect it to be wrong, and I'm just pleasantly surprised when they get it right. But I was really surprised. Like, I had a great time of the game. The environment was good. Penn State fans were great. Oregon fans, of course, were awesome. There were about 67,000 people there, which is a good turnout. And the Penn State fans, they were loud. That was basically a road game for Oregon, and they got it done anyway, of course. But there were some procedural things. There were other ones as well that I need not dive into. But those things stood out to me as like, what are you guys doing? What do you do? What are we doing here? How did you allow for this to happen? How did the Ty Burrell thing happen not once but twice? Nobody noticed. Nobody caught it. Or does nobody care? I don't know. Probably a mistake and nobody caught it. Hence why I'm speaking out. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and go Ducks.